Christ is, as seen through worship, so beautiful, and that it makes our division so heartbreaking. Do you know of accounts of worship bringing churches together, where the act of worship becomes part of that unifying, sanctifying progress?
It is difficult. It is difficult because we all, the more well-developed a church is, the more it's likely to have its own style of worship. And if you try and put it together with somebody else, then, oh dear, we normally do this at this point. And even saying the Lord's Prayer, the way the Roman Catholics say the end of the Lord's Prayer is different from the rest of us. And there are other oddities as well that would strike people as they move from one tradition to another. We somehow have to get over that hump. It is perfectly possible, feasible, and I would say desirable to do together all that we can do together. And many churches agree in theory that we can actually celebrate the Lord's Supper together, the Eucharist, the communion, whatever you call it. But churches are still very wary of it, and some actually frown on it. But I think we need to wrestle with what's going on there, because that is one of the big things. Of course, in theory, all churches recognize one another's baptisms. And I've heard Roman Catholic bishops say that we all have baptism and the Bible in common, that's a great way of putting a marker down, as it were. And one of the things that we can do together is we can read the Bible together. There are embargoes in some churches on sharing communion, but there's no embargo on getting together to read the Bible. And when I was in Durham, we started a thing called the Big Read, where we had ecumenical Bible study groups, in some cases almost street by street in town after town in the northeast of England, where people from different churches who vaguely knew each other on the street but hadn't quite realized that, oh, she goes to that church and that couple go to this church, and said, but actually let's get together in a very simple way and read the Bible together and say a simple prayer and see what happens. Nobody says you can't do it. We ought to be trying. At the same time, there are some acts of worship, and not least acts of penitence and lament, which we can do together. And I know in your work you were mentioning the thing that I read about lament. And when we talk about worship, often we've forgotten about lament. But there are many things in our world at the moment which we should be lamenting. I mean, the whole COVID crisis, the millions of people who've suffered and died through that, the whole refugee crisis, the world is groaning in travail, whether it's in the Middle East or in all sorts of parts of the world. The churches in any given area ought to be able to get together and say, this Sunday night, we are going to have a chorus of lament and prayer to hold on to the pain of the world in the presence of God. And since we're told in Romans 8 that that's one of the things that the Spirit will join in with specifically, we ought to be praying for that. So these are just examples, but there will be many others.